Hi, today we'll be making a line graph in Figma using generator. This is the line graph we'll be making. For reference, you can find it in the help menu in tutorials and examples in the list and data section. It's called line graph. The data that we'll be using is something that ChatGPT made for me. I asked it to give me some realistic looking numbers that will look good in a line graph, and it gave me this. I don't know how accurate these numbers are, but it doesn't really matter because the point of this video is the line graph. So once we build that, you can then just replace the numbers with anything. So let's see how this works. The line graph we'll be making is pretty simple, but once this is done, you can then modify it to make it a lot more interesting. It has a list of cities that are color-coded and a list of graphs that are also respectively color-coded. Then we have some lines, so a grid of horizontal and vertical lines. The horizontal lines come with numbers for the scale, and the vertical lines come with month names, which come from the data. Let's see how to make this. So first I will delete everything on the graph. Wait for this to disappear. The communication with Figma sometimes takes a while. And let's start. So the first thing we're going to do is we will build some kind of a line for the graph. We will do this by creating a point. We will repeat this point. By the way, I am assuming that you're watching this already having seen something about generator and that you roughly know what's going on. If you don't, there's a series of videos with orange thumbnails in my channel that explain the very, very basics of generator. So I'm just going to continue assuming that you at least somewhat know what's going on. So I'm going to repeat this point. I will use a sequence to move it. This will give me my basic scale for the graph. So let's say my step will be 20. And then I'm going to repeat this some number of times. I will give it maybe a randomness, just so that there's something to look at. Then I will feed this into a vector path. And I will run this into the points parameter. To see this better, I will give it a color stroke directly from the templates. It's very convenient. This is smooth, so I need to make it linear. And so this is our basic line for the line graph. And now we need to plug in some data into it and add names and all of this. Now that we have this, let's also make the scale, just so that we can roughly see what we're working with. For the scale, we're going to use a line. So that's in the shapes menu, line. By the way, here you can see that this line is at y0, but this graph is below y, and it's probably going to be above. That's because the random that I'm using for the points right now is from 0 to 100, but if we make it from 0 to minus 100, it'll then go above the graph, which is, we're also going to have to flip the value when using real data so that it goes above the graph. But right now this is a line that's at y equals 0, right here. And I would like to repeat this line. And I'm also going to use a sequence to move this line up a certain step in the y direction. So again, right now you can see that there are 5 lines. Let me get some color from here for those lines. I'm going to plug it directly into here, into the style of the line. These are obviously way too thick, so I'll make the weight 0.5, and I will make the color of the grid gray, like this. So right now we're already working with something. Immediately, just to keep this clean and so that we know what's going on at any point, we're going to use some panels to separate stuff and color code it. So I will make, because here we're making a path, and this is something that is geometric, I'm going to follow the color convention and make this red. These are the grid lines. So I'm also going to use a separate box for these, just to keep things clean. But I will make this white, or rather grayish as it'll show up. So these are the horizontal lines. We're going to deal with their length later. I'm just going to make them a little bit longer right now like this. The other thing you see is they're also going down because the step is positive, so the step has to be negative for the Y to go up, because this is computers. And then we need to make more of them, so I'm just going to increase the repeat. Now right now all we see are lines. Let's add a number to these lines. So at the same stage over here, I'm going to place a text shape. Now, because we're doing the line in sort of pixel units, we don't actually have to change anything. So this line will have a Y of 0, and this line will have a Y of like 100 or whatever. So basically, that's the scale that we're working with, and if we need to change it, we can then just add a multiplier to everything, and it'll help us with that. But we're going to keep it at the default scale for now. This text, let's type in some placeholder text. So let's say 100. It's over here. Immediately, we'd probably want to give it a color. I will drag this over here so that we can see that it's feeding both of them. There you go. The default font currently is black italic, so I'll change this to regular. I will move it to the left a little bit, and I'm going to say align X is right. Oh, now I got to move it back again. But what that allows us to do is to align everything to the right very easily. Now there's one of these numbers, so I need to repeat not just the line like so, but also the text. So what I do for this is I select the line and the text. I find the combine node and I Control Enter to connect both of these into a combine automatically, and then I just reconnect the combine into the repeat. What's happening now is that we do have our 10 numbers, but they're in the same spot because we haven't moved them. One thing I could do is to get another sequence and connect it into the Y of this and move them separately. What I'm going to do instead though is I'm gonna get rid of the sequence, set the Y back to 0, and then I will just move the combine instead. So this way I have one move for the group of line and number. So then I say move, and this is where I apply a sequence. So this is where I now plug this into the Y parameter, but the step has to be -10, and there we go. So now I'm moving, or in this case copying, the value. The other thing I need to do is I need to provide it with a dynamic number, because right now it's all 100. And also I think I'm going to move it a little to the right and change its size to something like, whoops, not to 87, but to 8. There we go. I'm going to use another sequence for the number. Oh, right, we can't because the number is text and the sequence is a number, so we need to convert it. So I will take a number to text node, and then the result of this I can run into the text parameter. Right now it goes to a negative value, so I need to remove this minus. And so what I get now is a scale with correct values and the first graph that we have. So right now you can see that the scale is sort of free floating, and I think that's fine because it doesn't actually need to be tied to the graph in any way except for the scale. So what I will do is I will move it to the top, and then I will take this output and this output and once again combine them so that I now have the final result in just one node. I can then double click here to see the scale, I can double click here to see the graph, or I can double click here to see everything. And the reason I'm putting scale above is because to have the graph be above the scale lines, above the grid, you need it to be first in the combine order. And since it's first, so on top in the combine order, I just kind of prefer to put it on top also in the visual order of the nodes. So now that we have the horizontal lines, I think we could probably add the vertical lines. It's not going to be very different. In fact, I think what we can do is we can just copy this whole thing over here. That doesn't give us anything because that's just the panel, so we need to double click it and then copy everything over here. But now we just have two copies of the same lines. So let me repeat only this so that we can only see this output. Now, this line will need to be rotated because we can see, imagine that they start from this point and go up. We need them to be rotated 90 degrees and go to the right. So rotate. Let me rotate it 90 degrees. What's going on here? Let's take just one line so we can see what's going on. Here's the line, and shift double clicking gives me the rotated line, and you can see that it's rotated around the center. We can fix that because we need to rotate it around the left point. We can add a set center node, and what that does is it allows us to say where it's rotated around. So we can show, you can see this red corner, that's the center. And we can now move the rotation point over here, and you can see how it changes how it gets rotated. And when I move it all the way to 0%, it now is rotated around this corner. So we can hide the center. We don't need to see it anymore. I prefer to do that because then it doesn't take up extra objects here, and because extra objects cost more time to transfer to Figma, so it just makes everything slower. Now we have one line. Let's see what all of these lines look like together. They look correct, except they're moving up instead of to the right. And so we need to change this sequence from going in the Y direction to going in the X direction. But the step now has to be positive because in the X there's no issue. The step for the lines we will take from the graph because we did define a step here of 20. And actually, you know what we're going to do? We're going to have a separate reference value. So we're going to say graph step. And then this will feed in here. If I press Control, you will notice that there's an arrow that appears right here. What that means is once I let go of the mouse, let me get both nodes in view so you can see what happens. Once I let go of the mouse, this value will get transferred to here. So I now can just modify what there was. So now I can go on and change it and not have to retype it. But I'm going to keep it at 20. And I will also plug this into the step of the second grid right here. So add 10 becomes add 20. Here the text will be different. This will be the months of the year. So I'm going to, for reference, put, let's say, January. There we go. I'll just say Jan, so it's shorter. All right, and in this case, I guess we have to set the align X to center and maybe a little bit lower, just so that it's visible. All right, now I would like to plug this into the same combine. I'm going to take the place of the line and I will reconnect the line like so. And then I will double click this combine so that we can see the final result for everything. It looks all right. How far these go will have to be determined by the length of the data and also how tall they are. We can probably change already. So we know that the numbers, at least in this case, go up to 100. We are going to set the line width, its width because it was rotated, to 100. I also feel like both of these can have a smaller font size. So let me try like a 6. And let me try to plug this into the other text shape to also make it a 6. All right, so now everything is smaller, and I think we're basically done with the grid. Now we need to work on the line and figure out the rest of this. But you can already see the advantage of having everything nicely organized using panels, because this way we already know what's going on without even any labels. These are the two grid graphs, and this is the line. Now this we're going to have to make a bit more complex now because of the data. So we will go over here and just copy this. I will take a text node, and I'm going to give myself a little bit of space and do my data work over here. So I'm going to paste this, resize it. So this is my data set. Let's see what we can get out of it. First of all, we need to parse it because it's CSV. So I'm going to parse the CSV. I'm getting a 13 by 12 table. Let me make sure there is an empty row, so I gotta get rid of it. So now it's a 13 by 11 table. This will sometimes trip me up when I'm working with data. Now, let me see what is in each one of these rows. So I will say list. This will be the node that I use to look at stuff. All right, so each one of these contains 13 items. So let me move this. I don't actually need this right now. Instead, I need a select from list node to get one of those rows. And now I can use a list node to see what's inside one of those rows. City, January 1st. So basically, these are the column titles. So I will call this column titles. So now I need to split this table into two. I need to leave just the column names because we're going to use them later to feed into the text shapes. But we also need the table without the column names. So we need to cut off the first row. The way we do that is we use a sublist node. We plug that into here and we just increase the start by 1. This works like a JavaScript subarray or substring. If you leave the end undefined, it takes the list to the end, starting with the start parameter all the way to the end. If you specify an end number, then it will cut it off sooner. But I just want to cut off the top, so I say start. I will even call this just data, because now there's no title. And now if I select from this list and look at it like this, now index 0 gives me already the first city. So now this table is actually the cities only. All right, now let me start with, let's say, city 0, and let me just plug these numbers into the first line that we have. That'll be the first city. Let me double click on this. All right. Actually, I think we should probably add the city name to this graph first. So just like before, I'm gonna increase the size of this. I will create a text shape. I'm gonna say city as a placeholder word. We can already see the city right here. But now, instead of the gray for the tables, for the grids, we're gonna use this color, which will also change later when we have more graphs. But we're gonna just plug this into the style parameter for now. So there it is. Then I think we should probably combine this. Or even, you know what we should do? We should probably group it to keep things a bit more organized over here in the layers panel. And then this group, which contains now the graph and the city, will be connected here instead. So this now goes into the final combine. And now we can just double click this and we don't have, and now we don't have any doubles or anything like that. And we can see that the graph and the city name have been grouped. We should probably have done the same thing to these lines. And we can probably do that now. So if I take these two nodes and say group, and then this group I connect instead of the combine, we can actually just delete the combine because we don't need it anymore. But now you can see that the grid lines and the grid words are also grouped, and this is just a bit easier to manage. And then we will do the same thing for the horizontal lines. So we're just going to take these two. We will say group with control. I press enter. It gives me a connected group, and then I just plug that in instead of the combine, and I delete the combine. So the visual result is the same, but the result over here as far as the Figma document is that things are a bit more organized. All right, so now that we have the city, let me also deal with the city a little bit. I think it needs to have a different font. and maybe a smaller font. And now I'm going to move it all the way to the left, like so. All right, and maybe a little bit higher because we will have more cities. All right, it's fine for now. So our graph is coming along. Now we need to plug in the real city name and the real temperature data. How do we do that? Well, we're going to have to take, well, this thing we called column titles, but this is actually, this should be called something like data row. I'm going to call it this. And the data row contains the name of the city plus the temperatures for that city. So what we need to do is we need to separate it just like here. One thing we do is we say select from list, and we select 0, and that becomes the city name. And then we will also use a sublist where we cut off the first element, and then we say just temperatures. And we can check this by connecting a list. So city name is now, just to make sure, London, and the temperatures are only the numbers. Good, but they're in text format, so we'll have to change it. Actually, we can do that right now. So if you have a bunch of text, a text list essentially, you can see that it's a double wire, but it's yellow. You can convert the whole list to numbers by just selecting this, going to text convert, and then saying text to number. And because you're giving it a list, at the output, you will also have a list. But now we need to reconnect this. And now you see that we have the same numbers, but the wire is now double blue, and the outputs here are now blue. So we can just plug whatever's coming out of here directly. So this is basically how our data is set up. Let me use some panels to clean things up. So this will be for the city. Or rather inside of the city. And then this will be, I actually don't need all of those nodes, I just need the panel. And this will be outside of the city. That's what we're going to call it. So this is for the list of cities, and this is for the list of temperatures, something like that. There we go. And I accidentally double-clicked the background, so now I need to go and double-click my result. All right. So we have our date, our city name. We're going to grab this and connect it to the city text shape. So now this becomes London. And for these points, right now we're using a random Y value. But instead of that, we actually want to use real data. So we'll just leave it flat for now. Because it's at -67, so we're going to say 0. It should now arrive here. That's correct. Now, we're going to take a select from list, because here now we have a list of numbers. Let me make this blue so that we can see that these are numbers. And we're going to select from this list of numbers to get our temperature for each point. So I can drag this actually over here. And I can run this number into the Y. This gives me the first value, but we see that it's below 0 because we need to negate it since Y goes in the opposite direction. So we go into the math functions menu and we add negative. And now it's up here. But it's the same value throughout because we're selecting the same number. So now when I change the index here, this line jumps around, but we actually want it to show all the values. So we use a sequence, which is not too surprising. And we just add 1 every time because it's an indexing sequence, and then we just run it into the index here. And what we get is the values for London for the whole month. Now, I don't know if we are getting all the values because the repeats right now are sort of free floating. So what we're going to do is we need to count the number of months. Now we know it's 12, but let's do this sort of by the book. We take this, which is the temperatures, the number of temperatures, and we can count the number of items in this array, in this list. So we just run this into here. This gives me a 12. That's the month count. I'm actually going to call it month count. And now this 12, I can run into the repeat, which creates the points. And the repeat is just here, and I run it into the count. All right, so now we have the full data set. Now we can also see that we need more lines. We need at least one more line. So we find our vertical lines. I think we did the vertical line second, and I run this into the repeat count over here. Now we can see that we're adding 11 repeats just manually, but we want to make this the correct number of repeats. That's the graph step. The correct number of repeats is going to be here. And we run it into here. So now the graph is as long, or rather the grid is as long as the graph is long. But now these horizontal lines aren't long enough. So let's fix that. We can perhaps run the same value into their length. But actually, how are we supposed to do that? Well, we have the step length and we have the number of months. So what we can do is we can just multiply it. We can use this smaller math node. We can say number of months, the month count, multiplied, I'm going to move this back here a little bit to put them at the same stage, and multiplied by the graph step. And now this value should give us the correct length for these horizontal lines. So let me run this into here. Go up to our horizontal line panel. And connect this into the line width. This gives me 32, which is clearly incorrect. It should be a lot bigger. And the reason it's incorrect is because I didn't specify multiply in my math node. And if I specify multiply, then it's once again incorrect, but it's more correct. And the reason it's incorrect is because we have 12 lines, but actually we just need the 11 segments because we don't need this extra bit. So we can just subtract it. We bring a math node, a simple one in this case, bring this over here, reconnect it like so. Doesn't matter where because it's multiplication. And I'm going to say -1. And now you see that we've cut off the end and the graph is of the right size. There we go, just gonna move it like this a little bit. And in fact, all of this is happening for the purposes of the grid, so I'm gonna move it to this panel. There we go. So now it's a little bit more logical. See, and actually, I think you will agree that this is not a complicated graph so far. I think we've already done quite a bit, not everything yet, but you know, there's already quite a bit of stuff. Not that many nodes, and if you do organize them using panels and keep things clear, then it's, I mean, you know in your head what you've been doing so far, so there's nothing complicated about this. Now, this is London. Let's now repeat this graph however many times we need to for however many cities there are. We can count how many cities there are just by counting this list. So we will make another count node. We will reconnect this here not to lose it. And apparently we have 10 cities. Seems to make sense. And I will run this. Oh, right. Well, we're not repeating anything yet, which we should. Before plugging these cities into the main combine, I'm going to say repeat. And so you can't see it. You might be able to see it here. But it just created a whole bunch of copies of this graph in the same place. So now we need to, not in the same place. It created a whole bunch of them after the first one. So we're not looping something correctly. Let's see what we're not looping correctly. It seems like, because we're using two sequences, one for the y value, one for the x value, both of those need to be looped onto the same repeat. So that's easy. We know how to do that. We select the two sequences, we combine them, holding Control to do it quickly and automatically. And then we just connect this into here. It seems like I have double-clicked the background again. So this isn't showing, so I'll just double-click it. So now it's correct. Now all of these lines are here. They're not doing anything weird. But now we just need to do the different cities, basically. So I have my repeat. I'm going to run this count, because right now it's repeating it 5 times by default. I'm going to run this into this final repeat for the graphs, for the count. It's now repeating it 10 times, but it's still the same graph 10 times. So now we need to use another sequence, an indexing sequence, and use it to select this. I'm going to rename this from data row to city, and this is going to be city count. So now I can index with a step of 1, obviously, the city selection. And I would like to loop it with this repeat, because this is the one that's repeating all the cities. And there you go. Now we have all the data for all the cities, but now we need to fix the graph because the colors are all the same and the city names are all in the same place. So dealing with city names is going to be easy. We just use a sequence or a range or whatever, plug that into the Y. And once they've been spread out, we can just play with the start value. Let's say the start will be -100, just to bring it to some visually pleasing. We can actually calculate it automatically, but I don't think at this point it's that necessary. Also, the font, I think, is way too big. Maybe 8 will work better. Yeah, that's, I guess, better. And I will change the X to -50, just so they're a little bit closer. No, -60. 5. All right. Our data is sticking out, which means that 100 is not the top that we should be marking. This is easy to fix. We did the horizontal lines first, and the repeat has manual count. So we just increase this to, let's say, 13. And because we linked everything into one group, everything now is updated automatically, including the number. The other thing we need to do is change the width of the vertical lines, or rather the horizontal lines that were rotated. So here the width is 100. We need to make it 120. Again, we could figure out the top line and get the rounded number and do this automatically, but I think for the purposes of this tutorial, this will be fine. Okay, so the grid is done. Now let's get some colors for these graphs. That should not be too hard. Currently we're using white, or this light gray that Figma uses by default. I'm going to change the color mode to, let's say, HSV. And I will set the saturation to 100. And I'm going to start the hue from 0. But I will use a sequence to add some value. Now I could just add some small value and have it go into like a rainbow, but that I think is a little bit hard to tell the numbers apart. So what I like to do is I like to add the golden ratio, the smaller one. So because that way each new hue is going to be at least somewhat unique, and that's sort of guaranteed mathematically. So let's instead of 20 just create the correct value. Over here in the number menu you can get a constant. We will choose the smaller phi for the golden ratio. I would like to multiply it by 360 because we're choosing hue and that's a circle. So multiply 360, 360, and then this goes into the add step. So it calculated the correct value, and so here you see that each one is different enough from the previous one, and also they're sort of different amongst themselves. We do need to fix this because it's hard to see, but essentially I think this is done. So the example graph contains little balls, little circles at the shoulders here, at the joins. I don't think we're going to do this for the tutorial. I'll leave that as an exercise to you. It's not hard to do at all. You just follow the same steps as we did for the points, but just make a series of circles or ellipses. The only thing it seems like we missed is the month names, which we can also handle. They are over here, and right now they're all January. So what we need to do is we need to, again, get the list of month names, use a select node, and just go through the months and assign them to each new text shape. So let's get the month names. Here is our data. The column titles contain everything, including the first one, which says city. So we need to, or actually, let's just check this. I'm going to add a list, see what that shows. That shows that the first one is indeed city. I need to remove that, so I'll cut this off with a sublist. I'll cut off the first element, and then so these are now month names. And so I can now say select from list. I will move this into the gray panel because this is where it affects the text. Select from list. The selection goes into the text shape. So now everything is January. I'm going to cut off, or I'm actually just going to keep with a substring, which works just like a sublist. I'm going to start at 0 and only take the first 3 characters because I don't need the whole month name. Right now it's Jan, 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 just like it was. But I can now change it using a sequence. So if I set the step to 1, it becomes an indexing sequence. I plug this into here. And the months are now set automatically. So now this is done. The only thing I would like to add now is a frame node to show you something I've added for the last update. So normally when you plug the objects in, and let me give it a white fill color straight away. I'm going to round the corners because that always looks nice, and I will just double click on the frame. So what's happening now is that the geometry that we built for the graph starts at 0, 0, but the frame internally has its own geometry. So because the frame's 0, 0 is the top left corner and the graph goes up, what happens is that even if I move the frame to like -100, everything that's inside the frame moves with it because the coordinates that were outside now became the coordinates that are inside and are basically ignored outside the frame. The way to fix that is we set the position parameter to absolute. And what that does, it allows me to just reshape the frame around existing content, not unlike you would do in Figma manually. So here you can see that already it's a little bit better. I'm gonna just wing it by saying y is minus 200. And x is minus 200. And I'll say that the width is like 400 and the height is 400. This is the result I got. It's not exactly what I need, but already I can see how to do it. Maybe in the future I'll add the ability to just do this manually and then have the results come back to generator. We'll see. That would be nice. Minus 150, something like that. And then I can just set the width to 300. No, 350. And the height to something like 200. Would that be enough? All right, let's say 180. Nope, 190. So there you go. Let's say that we're happy with this. And basically the graph is done. So if you like what you see, if you think Generator could be useful to you, and if you like the work that I'm doing, the best way to support me would be to buy a Generator subscription. This will help me pay the bills and continue making all the cool stuff that I'm making. Thanks for watching.